You have lived for decades with a certainty, a truth so solid it became the foundation of your entire existence. And then one day, in a single moment, that truth crumbles to dust right before your eyes. You have mourned, you have grieved, you have learned to live with an emptiness that seemed permanent, only to discover that everything you believed was a lie. The person you trusted most in this world, the person you built a life with, the person you buried and wept for, standing right in front of you, alive, breathing, as if death itself was just another deception. You know what it feels like to question your own sanity, to wonder if your eyes are playing tricks on you, to feel your heart stop and restart in the same breath. Today, I am going to share with you a story that will shake everything you thought you knew about love, about trust, and about the lengths people will go to escape the life they chose. This is a story about a man who followed a ghost and discovered that some betrayals are worse than death itself. I am Robert. I am 72 years old, and 3 months ago, I buried my wife of 47 years. At least, that is what I believed I did. The funeral was held at St. Matthew's Church in suburban Philadelphia, the same church where we had married nearly half a century before, the same church where we had baptized our 2 children, the same church where we had celebrated anniversaries and mourned the passing of our parents. The casket was closed because the doctors said the illness had taken too much from her body, that it would be kinder for everyone to remember her as she was in life rather than what remained after months of treatment. I held my daughter's hand through the service. I accepted the condolences of friends and neighbors. I stood at the graveside and watched them lower Margaret into the earth, and I felt something inside me die along with her. For 47 years, she had been my partner, my confidant, my best friend. We had built a life together in our house on Maple Street, raised 2 children who grew up to have families of their own, retired from our jobs, and settled into what I thought would be our golden years. When the cancer diagnosis came, it felt like a cruel joke. She had always been the healthy one, the one who ate right and exercised, the one who made sure I took my blood pressure medication and went for my annual checkups. I was supposed to go first. That was the unspoken agreement between us, and she had broken it. The 3 months after her death were the darkest of my life. I wandered through our house like a stranger, touching her things, sitting in her chair, sleeping on her side of the bed just to feel close to something that no longer existed. My children worried about me. My son Michael called every day from his home in New Jersey, and my daughter Patricia stopped by at least 3 times a week with casseroles I barely touched. They talked about grief counseling, about support groups, about maybe selling the house and moving somewhere smaller. I nodded and agreed to consider their suggestions, but inside, I had already decided that this house was where I would finish out my days, surrounded by the memories of the woman I had loved for nearly my entire adult life. I was not looking for anything. I was not expecting anything. I was simply existing, putting one foot in front of the other, waiting for the grief to either consume me or transform into something I could learn to live with. That is why what happened 3 months after the funeral still feels like something out of a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. I had gone to Philadelphia General Hospital for a routine checkup, the kind of thing Margaret would have insisted I attend, even though I felt perfectly fine. My doctor wanted blood work done and had sent me to the main hospital lab rather than the smaller facility closer to my home because of some insurance issue I did not fully understand. I was sitting in the waiting room, flipping through an old magazine without really seeing the pages, when I looked up and saw her walk past the doorway. My heart stopped. My brain refused to process what my eyes were showing me. It was Margaret. Not someone who looked like Margaret, not a woman who shared some passing resemblance, but Margaret herself, my wife, the woman I had buried 3 months before. She was walking down the hallway in a nurse's uniform, her hair cut shorter than she had ever worn it in our marriage, her face thinner than I remembered, but unmistakably her. The same way she held her shoulders, the same slight tilt of her head when she walked, the same rhythm to her steps that I had watched for nearly 5 decades. I sat frozen in my chair, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to do anything but stare as she turned a corner and disappeared from view. The magazine slipped from my fingers and fell to the floor, but I did not notice. Every cell in my body was screaming at me that what I had just seen was impossible. and yet I knew with absolute certainty that I had seen it. When I could finally make my legs work, I stood up and walked toward the hallway where she had gone. My hands were shaking. My breath was coming in short, shallow gasps. I felt lightheaded, and for a moment I wondered if I was having some kind of medical episode, if my grief had finally cracked something essential in my mind. But I kept walking, turning the corner she had turned, scanning every face I passed for the one I knew better than my own. She was gone. The hallway stretched out before me, filled with nurses and doctors and patients and visitors, but none of them were Margaret. I walked the entire length of it, then turned back and walked it again, searching, desperate, certain that I had not imagined what I had seen. When I returned to the waiting room, the receptionist called my name for my appointment. I considered ignoring her, considered spending the rest of the day wandering the hospital looking for a ghost. But something stopped me, some rational part of my brain that had not yet caught up with what my heart already knew. If this story resonates with you, if you have felt the earth shift beneath your feet when something you believed with all your heart turned out to be a lie, you are not alone. This channel exists for people like us, people who have been blindsided by life and are trying to make sense of the unthinkable. Subscribe so we can continue this journey together, supporting each other through the stories we share. I went through my appointment in a daze. The nurse took my blood pressure and frowned at the numbers, asking if I was feeling all right, if I was under any unusual stress. I lied and said I was fine, just tired, just still adjusting to life without my wife. She patted my arm sympathetically and drew my blood, and I sat there thinking about Margaret walking down that hallway in a nurse's uniform, alive, breathing, existing in a world where I had been grieving her death for 3 months. When the appointment was over, I did not go home. Instead, I drove to a coffee shop across the street from the hospital and sat in a booth by the window, watching the entrance, waiting to see if she would emerge. I sat there for 4 hours. I ordered coffee I did not drink and food I did not eat, and I watched every person who walked through those doors. She did not appear. As the afternoon faded into evening, I finally accepted that I would not see her again that day, but I also knew with absolute certainty that I would return. Whatever I had seen, whoever I had seen, I needed to understand it. I needed to know if my mind had finally broken under the weight of grief, or if something far more sinister was happening. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a different person. I stopped answering my phone. I ignored the casseroles Patricia left on my doorstep. I spent every day at that hospital sitting in different waiting rooms, walking different hallways, eating in the cafeteria, watching, always watching. I told myself I was looking for closure, that I needed to confirm what I had seen was a hallucination, a trick of light, a desperate creation of a grieving mind. But deep down, I knew I was looking for her. I was looking for Margaret. And on the 12th day, I found her again. She was coming out of a staff entrance on the side of the building, still in her nurse's uniform, still with that shorter haircut, still moving with the exact same rhythm I had memorized over 47 years of marriage. This time, I was ready. I had parked my car near that entrance because I had noticed hospital staff used it frequently, and I had been watching it for 3 days. When she emerged, I was sitting in my car with the engine running, prepared to follow her wherever she went. My hands were steady now. My heart was still pounding, but there was a cold determination beneath the fear and confusion. I watched her walk to a small blue sedan parked in the staff lot, get in, and pull out toward the street. I waited until she was almost out of sight before I followed. She drove north, away from Philadelphia, through suburbs that gradually gave way to smaller towns, and then rural farmland. I stayed several cars behind her, terrified of being noticed, terrified of losing her, terrified of what I might discover at the end of this journey. After nearly an hour, she pulled into the driveway of a small farmhouse on a country road, the kind of place you could drive past 100 times without noticing. I parked down the road and watched her get out of the car, stretch her back the way she always did after a long drive, and walk inside. The house looked old but well-maintained, with a neat garden in front and a pickup truck parked beside her sedan. She had a life here, a real life, in a place I had never seen, living as a person I did not recognize. I sat in my car until the sun went down, watching lights turn on inside the house, watching shadows move past windows, trying to understand how the woman I had loved and buried could be living in a farmhouse an hour from our home. Apparently healthy, apparently fine, apparently not dead at all. When it became too dark to see anything, I drove home in a state of shocked numbness that lasted for the entire journey. That night, I did not sleep. I sat in the living room, surrounded by photographs of our life together, and I tried to make sense of what I had discovered. The facts were simple and devastating. Margaret was alive. She had faked her death. She had left me, left our children, left our entire life behind without a word of explanation. The woman I had trusted completely for nearly half a century had constructed an elaborate deception that included a faked illness, a closed casket funeral, and a burial I had witnessed with my own eyes. The how of it was beyond my comprehension. The why of it was even more impossible to fathom. We had been happy. At least I had thought we were happy. We had arguments like any couple, disagreements about money or the children or where to go on vacation, but nothing that would explain this kind of betrayal. Nothing that would justify leaving behind everything we had built together. I looked at our wedding photo on the mantel, at the young couple smiling at the camera with no idea of the lives they would live together, and I felt something shift inside me. The grief I had been carrying for 3 months began to transform into something harder, something colder, something that demanded answers even if those answers destroyed whatever remained of my image of her. Right now, you might be feeling exactly what I felt in those dark hours, that sickening realization that the person you trusted most in this world was not who you thought they were, that everything you believed about your life, your marriage, your shared history, was built on a foundation of lies. I need to pause here and ask you something directly, something that matters. Have you ever discovered that someone you loved completely was capable of a betrayal you never imagined possible? Have you ever had the ground pulled out from under you by someone who was supposed to be your safe harbor in life's storms? If you are nodding right now, if you feel that familiar sick sensation in your stomach because someone finally said out loud what you have been carrying in silence, I want you to know that your experience matters. When you share your story in the comments, even just a few words, you are helping someone else who is reading this feeling less alone in their pain. You are building the community that we all needed but did not have. So let me see you down there. Type in the comments, "I was betrayed by someone I trusted completely." That is all. Just that sentence. And I promise you, when you read the other comments, when you see how many people write the same words, you will understand that you were never alone in this. You were just silent together. Thank you for having the courage to speak up. Your voice matters here. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I was not going to confront her. Not yet. First, I needed to understand what had happened, how she had done it, and most importantly, why. I needed answers, and I suspected that simply showing up at her door would not give me the truth. She had proven herself capable of deception on a scale I could barely comprehend. She would lie again if she needed to, so instead of confronting her, I began to investigate. I started with the illness. Margaret had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 8 months before her supposed death. The diagnosis had come after weeks of vague symptoms, fatigue and weight loss, and a persistent pain in her abdomen that she had initially dismissed as nothing serious. I remembered accompanying her to the doctor, sitting in the waiting room while she had tests done, holding her hand when the oncologist delivered the devastating news. The cancer was advanced, he said. Treatment would be aggressive, but the prognosis was not good. We had both cried in that office, and I had promised her I would be with her every step of the way. Now I wondered how much of that had been real and how much had been performance. I called her oncologist's office and asked to schedule an appointment to discuss my late wife's treatment. The receptionist was sympathetic and accommodating, and 3 days later I found myself sitting across from Dr. Harrison, the man who had supposedly treated Margaret through her final months. He was a kind man in his 60s, with tired eyes and the patient demeanor of someone who delivered bad news for a living. He offered his condolences and asked how I was coping with my loss. I thanked him and then asked a question I had rehearsed a dozen times. Could he explain the progression of her illness to me? I told him I was struggling to understand how it had happened so fast, how she had gone from diagnosis to death in just a few months. His answer chilled me to the bone. He said he understood my confusion, that pancreatic cancer was often unpredictable in its progression, but that Margaret's case had actually been somewhat slower than average. He talked about the treatments they had tried, the side effects she had experienced, the difficult decisions they had made together about quality of life versus aggressive intervention. Everything he said matched what I remembered, what Margaret had told me, what I had witnessed with my own eyes, except for one detail. He mentioned that toward the end, Margaret had insisted on receiving her final treatments at a specialized facility in New York, that she had been very particular about this, and that he had reluctantly agreed because he felt it was important to honor the wishes of patients in their final stages. I had never known about any facility in New York. Margaret had told me she was receiving treatment at a local clinic, that she did not want to travel far from home in her weakened state, that she wanted to spend her remaining time surrounded by familiar things and familiar people. I had believed her completely because I had no reason not to. Now I understood that those weeks when she had claimed to be at the local clinic, when I had dropped her off and picked her up, when I had helped her into bed afterward and held her through the exhaustion, she had actually been somewhere else entirely. She had been building her escape, creating the infrastructure of her fake death, while I sat at home worrying about losing her. The betrayal was even deeper than I had imagined. She had not just left me. She had used my love and devotion as cover for her deception. She had exploited my trust and my grief to ensure that no one would ever question what had happened. I thanked Dr. Harrison for his time and left his office with a clearer picture of what had happened, even as the emotional devastation grew deeper. Over the following weeks, I continued my investigation with the methodical patience of a man who had nothing left to lose. I discovered that Margaret had been making small withdrawals from accounts I did not know existed, building a financial cushion that I had never seen. I found records of a storage unit she had rented under her maiden name, though when I went there, it had already been emptied. I learned that the funeral home we had used was run by a man named Thomas Whitmore, who had inherited the business from his father and had known Margaret since childhood. When I visited him and asked pointed questions about the handling of her remains, he became nervous and evasive, eventually asking me to leave his establishment. The closed casket, I realized, had not contained Margaret at all. I did not know what it had contained or how she had arranged for a death certificate and a burial without an actual body, but I knew that Thomas Whitmore had been part of her plan. The web of deception was larger than I had imagined, involving people I had trusted and institutions I had believed were beyond corruption. Every answer I found led to more questions, and every question led me deeper into a reality I had never suspected existed. Stories like these have the power to change how we see our own lives. If you are finding clarity here, if something in this narrative is helping you understand your own situation better, consider subscribing. Every story I share is chosen to help us all grow stronger, wiser, and more compassionate with ourselves and others. While I investigated the past, I also continued to watch the present. At least twice a week, I drove to that farmhouse and observed Margaret's new life from a distance. I learned her schedule, her routines, the rhythms of her days in this place I had never known existed. She worked at the hospital 3 days a week, always the same shifts, always parking in the same spot. On her days off, she gardened, went to the grocery store in the small town nearby, occasionally visited a coffee shop where she sat alone reading books I could not identify from my car across the street. She seemed content, peaceful even, living a life that had no room for me or our children, or the 47 years we had shared. Sometimes another person was there, a man about her age who drove the pickup truck I had seen in the driveway. He came and went at irregular intervals, never staying overnight that I could tell, but clearly familiar with the property and with Margaret. I watched them interact through the windows of the farmhouse, watched them share meals and conversation, watched them move around each other with the easy comfort of people who had known each other for a long time. I did not know who he was or what he meant to her, but his presence added another layer to the mystery I was trying to unravel. 2 months after I first saw Margaret in the hospital, I finally had enough information to confront her. I knew the basics of how she had faked her death, though some details remained unclear. I knew she had help from at least 2 people, the funeral director and probably someone at the hospital who had provided false medical records. I knew she had been planning this for at least a year, maybe longer, carefully constructing an escape route while maintaining the facade of a dying woman. What I still did not know was why. Why had she done this? What was so terrible about our life together that she had chosen to erase herself completely, rather than simply ask for a divorce? What had I done, or failed to do, that had driven her to such extreme measures? These questions haunted me, kept me awake at night, poisoned every memory I had of our marriage. I needed answers, and I finally decided that the only way to get them was to ask her directly. I drove to the farmhouse on a Wednesday afternoon when I knew she would be home alone, the man with the pickup truck having left the previous evening. I parked in her driveway, walked up to her front door, and knocked. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, but my hands were steady and my resolve was firm. I had practiced what I would say, how I would present myself, calm and controlled despite the hurricane of emotions raging inside me. When the door opened and Margaret saw me standing there, her face went through a transformation I will never forget. First shock, pure and undiluted, her eyes going wide and her mouth dropping open. Then fear, a flash of it crossing her features before she could suppress it. And finally, something I could only describe as resignation, as if she had always known this moment would come and had simply been waiting for it to arrive. She said my name, just that one word, Robert, but in her voice I heard 47 years of history, all the love and frustration and shared experience compressed into those 2 syllables. I told her I knew everything, which was not entirely true, but I wanted her off balance, wanted her to believe that lying to me again was pointless. I told her I had seen her at the hospital, had followed her here, had spent 2 months watching her live a life that was supposed to be impossible. I told her I wanted the truth, all of it, and that she owed me at least that much after everything she had done. She stepped aside and let me into the house, her movements slow and defeated, like a prisoner accepting her sentence. The interior was modest but comfortable, filled with furniture I did not recognize and books I had never seen her read. There were no photographs anywhere, I noticed, no images of our children or grandchildren, no evidence of the life she had left behind. She led me to the kitchen and offered me coffee, falling into the familiar rituals of hospitality that had defined our marriage, and I accepted because I did not know what else to do. We sat across from each other at her small kitchen table, and I waited for her to speak. The silence stretched between us, filled with decades of unasked questions and unexpressed truths. Finally, she began to talk, and what she told me shattered everything I thought I knew about our life together. She said she had been unhappy for a very long time, so long that she could not remember what it felt like to be anything else. She said our marriage had become a prison, a comfortable prison with good food and a nice house and children she loved, but a prison nonetheless. She said she had tried to talk to me about it over the years, had tried to express her discontent, her yearning for something different, but that I had never really listened. She said I heard the words but did not understand the depth of what she was feeling, that I dismissed her concerns as temporary moods or symptoms of menopause or natural adjustments to retirement. She said she felt invisible in our marriage, like a supporting character in a story that was supposed to be about both of us, but had somehow become only about me. I listened to her accusations with a mixture of outrage and guilt. Part of me wanted to defend myself, to argue that I had always tried to be a good husband, that I had provided for our family and been faithful and showed up for all the important moments. But another part of me recognized uncomfortable truths in her words. I remembered times when she had tried to talk about her feelings, and I had changed the subject or offered quick solutions to problems that could not be easily solved. I remembered the way her eyes sometimes went distant during our conversations, as if she had already left the room even while her body remained. She told me about the man with the pickup truck. His name was David, and she had known him since high school. They had dated briefly before I came into the picture, had stayed in touch as casual friends over the years, and had reconnected more seriously about 5 years ago when he had reached out after his own wife's death. She said nothing physical had happened while she was still with me, but emotionally she had already begun to leave our marriage. David represented everything she had never had with me: spontaneity, passion, the feeling of being truly seen and heard. He had encouraged her to imagine a different life, had helped her see that she did not have to stay trapped in a role she had never chosen for herself. When she had started feeling physical symptoms that she initially feared might be real illness, the idea had come to her almost fully formed. She could use the fear of death to create an actual death, one that would free her completely while protecting our children from the trauma of watching their mother abandon their father. In her mind, dying was kinder than leaving. A widow is pitied and comforted. An abandoned spouse is the subject of whispered speculation and pity of a different, more shameful kind. I asked her how she had done it, how she had convinced doctors and funeral directors and bureaucratic systems that she was dead when she was sitting right in front of me, very much alive. She explained it with the same matter-of-fact efficiency she had always brought to household tasks, as if faking one's death was no different from organizing a closet or planning a holiday dinner. The funeral director was an old friend who owed her a significant favor from decades ago, something she refused to elaborate on but implied was serious enough to guarantee his cooperation. The doctor visits and treatments had been real at first, when she had genuinely worried about her health. But once she was cleared of any serious illness, she had begun seeing a different doctor in another city, one who would provide the false records she needed. The hospital where she now worked had no idea who she really was. She had used her maiden name and created a new identity with the help of someone David knew, someone who specialized in such things for people fleeing domestic violence situations. The irony was not lost on me. She had used tools designed to protect abused women to escape a marriage, where the only violence had been her own growing resentment. I know how isolating it feels when you are going through something difficult and nobody seems to understand. That is why I created this space. Here, your feelings are valid, your struggles are real, and your story matters. If this channel is giving you even a small sense of relief or understanding, please subscribe. You deserve to have a place where you feel heard and seen. When she finished speaking, I did not know how to respond. Part of me wanted to rage at her, to scream about the betrayal, the manipulation, the incredible selfishness of what she had done. Part of me wanted to cry, to grieve not just the loss of my wife, but the loss of my understanding of who she had been all along. And part of me, a small part I was ashamed to acknowledge, understood. I understood the feeling of being trapped, of wanting to escape, of imagining a different life where you could become someone new. I had never acted on those feelings, had always pushed them down and focused on my responsibilities, but I could not claim I had never felt them. We sat in her kitchen for hours, talking and arguing and crying and falling into silences that stretched for minutes at a time. She apologized, but the apology felt hollow, a formality performed because it was expected rather than a genuine expression of remorse. I asked her if she had ever considered simply asking for a divorce, and she laughed bitterly and said I would not have given her one, that I would have convinced myself she was going through a phase and waited it out until she gave up. I wanted to argue with her, to insist that I would have respected her wishes, but I was not entirely sure she was wrong. As the afternoon turned to evening, I asked her the question that had been burning in my mind since I first saw her in that hospital hallway. What had she expected would happen? Did she think I would grieve forever, alone in our house, never discovering the truth? Did she plan to live the rest of her life an hour away, constantly at risk of being seen by someone who knew her, by one of our children, by friends who would recognize her despite the shorter hair and thinner face? Her answer surprised me. She said she had expected to move away, that David owned property in another state and they had planned to relocate within a year of her supposed death. The job at the hospital was temporary, a way to maintain health insurance and earn money while they finalized their plans. She had taken the position at Philadelphia General because it was large enough that she could blend in, and because she had been assured by her new identity documents that no one would connect her to her former life. She had not expected me to be there that day. She had not expected to be caught. And now that she had been caught, she did not know what she wanted to happen next. I told her I had not decided what I was going to do with what I had learned. I could expose her deception, inform the authorities that she had committed fraud, destroy the new life she had built, and possibly send her to prison. I could tell our children the truth, shatter their memory of their mother and replace it with this stranger who had abandoned them without a word. Or I could keep her secret, return to my empty house and my grief, and pretend that what I had discovered did not change everything. None of the options felt right. None of them would give me peace or bring back the life I had lost. She asked me what I wanted, and I realized I did not know. I had been so focused on finding the truth that I had never considered what I would do once I had it. The truth was supposed to set you free, but I felt more trapped than ever, caught between a past that had been a lie and a future I could not imagine. I left her farmhouse that night without making any decisions. I drove home through the darkness, passing through the same suburbs and rural areas I had traveled so many times in the past 2 months, and I thought about everything she had told me. I thought about all the moments in our marriage that I had interpreted one way, but that might have meant something entirely different. The times she had seemed distant or distracted, which I had attributed to tiredness or stress, might have been moments when she was dreaming of escape. The suggestions she had made over the years about traveling or trying new activities, which I had usually declined because I was comfortable with our routines, might have been desperate attempts to find something that would make her want to stay. I was not blameless in this. I had failed her in ways I was only beginning to understand. But her failure was so much larger, so much more devastating, that I could not find it in myself to accept equal responsibility. She had not just left me. She had erased herself from our lives and made our children grieve a death that had never happened. There was no equivalence between emotional neglect and that level of deliberate cruelty. Over the following weeks, I wrestled with my choices. I went back and forth dozens of times, sometimes deciding in the morning to expose her and changing my mind by evening, sometimes waking in the night convinced that keeping her secret was the only merciful option. I thought about our children, about what this revelation would do to them. Patricia had just started to emerge from the deep depression that had followed her mother's death. Michael had begun to engage with life again, making plans for the future that he had put on hold during Margaret's supposed illness. Did they deserve to know the truth? Would the truth heal them or break them further? I thought about my own remaining years, however many or few they might be. Did I want to spend them as a victim, consumed by bitterness and betrayal? Or could I find some way to transform this experience into something that would allow me to move forward? If this story is stirring something inside you, if you are recognizing patterns in your own life or finding the courage to make changes, that is exactly why these stories need to be told. Subscribe to this channel and join a community of people who are choosing their own dignity, setting boundaries, and refusing to be diminished. We are rewriting the script together. Eventually, I made my decision. I chose not to expose Margaret. Not because I had forgiven her, because I had not and perhaps never would. Not because I wanted to protect her, because any desire I once had to shield her had died along with my trust. I chose silence because exposing her would cause more harm to the people I loved than the satisfaction of justice would be worth. Patricia and Michael had buried their mother. They had grieved and begun to heal. Telling them the truth would force them to grieve all over again, not for a mother who had died, but for a mother who had chosen to leave them. The pain would be different, but no less devastating, and it would be complicated by anger and confusion and questions that could never be adequately answered. I could not do that to them. I could not be the instrument of their second breaking, so I kept the secret. I returned to my house on Maple Street and resumed the life of a grieving widower, but now my grief was different. I was grieving not just a woman, but an entire understanding of my own history. Every memory I had of our marriage was now tainted by the knowledge of how it had ended, by the realization that she had been planning her escape while I had been planning our future together. But keeping the secret did not mean doing nothing. I went to see Thomas Whitmore, the funeral director who had helped Margaret stage her death. I did not threaten him or make accusations. I simply told him that I knew what he had done, that I had proof, and that I expected him to make things right in whatever way he could. His face went pale and he began to stammer explanations and justifications, but I cut him off and told him I was not interested in his reasons. I was interested in consequences. I told him that he would make a significant donation to a grief counseling center in our community, anonymously, as a way of atoning for the pain he had helped cause. And I told him that if I ever learned he had helped anyone else fake their death, I would expose everything and let the legal system deal with him. He agreed to my terms without argument, and when I checked a month later, the donation had been made. It was not justice, but it was something. It was a small acknowledgement that actions have consequences, even when those consequences are not the ones you might expect. I also wrote Margaret a letter. I did not deliver it in person or send it through the mail. Instead, I drove to her farmhouse one last time, in the middle of the night when I knew she would be asleep, and I left it in her mailbox. In the letter, I told her everything I had not been able to say during our conversation. I told her about the pain she had caused, not just to me, but to our children, to our friends, to everyone who had mourned her passing. I told her about the dark months after her funeral, the nights I had lain awake, wishing I had died instead, the emptiness that had consumed me from the inside out. I told her that I understood, at least partially, why she had felt trapped, and that I accepted my share of responsibility for the failures of our marriage. But I also told her that her response to those failures was unforgivable, that she had taken the coward's way out, and that she would have to live with the knowledge of what she had done for whatever remained of her life. I told her I would not expose her secret, but I also told her why. Not for her sake, but for the sake of our children, who deserved better than to have their mother destroy them twice. I signed the letter with my name. No closing sentiment, no expression of love or anger, just my signature, and I walked away. The months that followed were strange and difficult. I had to learn how to grieve in a new way, not for a woman who had died, but for a relationship that had never been what I thought it was. I had to find a way to interact with my children, to accept their sympathy and concern, without ever hinting at the truth I now carried. It was exhausting and isolating, but it was also clarifying. I began to see my marriage more clearly than I ever had when Margaret was alive, to recognize the patterns and failures that had led us to this ending. I saw my own contributions to her unhappiness, the ways I had prioritized my comfort over her needs, the assumptions I had made about what she wanted without ever really asking. I was not able to change the past, but I could learn from it. I could become a better listener, a more present participant in the relationships that remained to me. I also began to rebuild my life. Not the life I had imagined for my retirement years, the one with Margaret by my side as we aged together, but a different life, one that was entirely my own. I started attending a support group for widowers, and while I could never tell them the full truth of my situation, I found comfort in their company and their shared understanding of loss. I reconnected with old friends I had neglected during the years of Margaret's supposed illness. I took up hobbies I had always been interested in but had never pursued, woodworking and bird watching, and learning to cook meals more complicated than the frozen dinners I had been subsisting on. I was not happy exactly, the wound was still too fresh for happiness, but I was surviving. I was finding ways to fill the emptiness with something other than despair. Sometimes late at night, I would think about Margaret in her farmhouse, living the life she had chosen over the life she had with me. I wondered if she was happy, truly happy, or if she had discovered that escape was not the same as fulfillment. I wondered if she ever regretted her choice, if she ever woke in the night thinking about the children she had abandoned, or the husband she had deceived. I wondered if David, the man she had left me for, could ever give her what she was looking for, or if she would eventually find herself trapped again, yearning for another impossible escape. I did not wish her ill, but I did not wish her well either. She had become a stranger to me, someone I had thought I knew completely, but had never really known at all. 1 year after I discovered her secret, I received a letter. It was not signed, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. In it, she thanked me for keeping her secret, for protecting our children from the truth. She said she thought about them every day, that leaving them had been the hardest part of what she had done, and that she hoped they were finding happiness in their lives. She said she had read my letter many times, that my words had wounded her as deeply as I had intended, and that she accepted them as the price of her freedom. She said she was sorry, truly sorry, for all the pain she had caused, but she was not sorry for leaving. The person she had been in our marriage was slowly dying anyway, she wrote. All she had done was make it official. The letter ended with a single line that I have never been able to forget. I hope you find someone who makes you feel seen, Robert. You deserve that, even if I was never able to give it to you. I did not reply to her letter. There was nothing left to say. But I kept it. folded in a drawer with our old wedding photos and the sympathy cards from her funeral. It was evidence of something I could never explain, a document from a life that had happened and not happened at the same time. When I die, my children will find it, and they will not understand. But maybe that is fitting. Maybe some secrets are meant to be buried with the people who carry them. Sometimes we need to hear that transformation is possible, that we are not doomed to repeat the same painful patterns forever. If these stories are giving you hope, showing you that change is real and within reach, then stay with me. Subscribe so you never miss a story that might be exactly what you need to hear at exactly the right moment. Looking back now, 3 years after that day in the hospital when I saw a ghost walking down the hallway, I can say that the experience changed me in ways I never expected. It forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about myself, about my marriage, and about the nature of love and commitment. It taught me that you can never truly know another person, not completely, no matter how many years you spend together or how intimate you believe your connection to be. We are all mysteries to each other, and perhaps to ourselves as well. It also taught me that betrayal, while devastating, is not necessarily the end of everything. You can survive the discovery that your entire life was built on a lie. You can find meaning and purpose in the aftermath of destruction. The human capacity for resilience is far greater than we imagine, tested only when circumstances force us to discover it. My children have flourished in the years since their mother's supposed death. Patricia went back to school and got her master's degree in social work, a dream she had put aside during Margaret's illness. Michael started a small business and recently became a father again, his third grandchild, giving me a reason to smile even on the darkest days. I have not told them the truth, and I never will. Their memory of their mother is imperfect but loving, tinged with sadness but not poisoned by betrayal. That is my final gift to them, the protection of an illusion that allows them to grieve cleanly and move forward with their lives. Maybe someday, after I am gone, they will discover the truth through some channel I cannot foresee. Maybe they will find Margaret's letter in my drawer and trace its origins back to a woman who should be dead, but is not. If that happens, I hope they will understand why I kept the secret, and I hope they will forgive me for the deception. I did what I believed was best for them, just as Margaret convinced herself she was doing what was best for herself. We are all just trying to survive, making choices that seem right in the moment, and living with the consequences forever after. As for Margaret, I have not seen her since that day in her kitchen. I do not drive past her farmhouse anymore. I do not look for her at the hospital or wonder about her life with David. She has become a character in a story I tell myself sometimes, a cautionary tale about the limits of knowledge and the price of assumptions. The woman I married, the woman I raised children with, the woman I thought I would grow old beside, that woman does exist anymore. Maybe she never did. Maybe she was always a performance, a role Margaret played while the real person hid somewhere inside, waiting for her chance to escape. I will never know for certain, and I have made peace with that uncertainty. What I do know is this: I am 75 years old, and I am still here. I have survived the death of my wife and the discovery that she never died at all. I have learned that love can be both genuine and insufficient, that people can care for you deeply and still need something you cannot give them. I have learned that the end of a story is never really the end, that life continues to unfold in directions we never anticipated, offering new chapters we never knew were possible. And I have learned, most importantly, that the measure of a person is not what happens to them, but how they respond. I could have let Margaret's betrayal define the rest of my life. I could have become bitter, withdrawn, consumed by anger at the injustice of what she had done. Instead, I chose to keep living, to find meaning in the connections that remained, to build something new from the wreckage of the old. I am not telling you this story to offer easy answers or simple morals. Life is more complicated than that. People are more complicated than that. What I am telling you is that you can survive the worst thing you can imagine happening to you. You can discover that your entire life was a lie and still find reasons to get up in the morning. You can carry a secret that weighs more than you thought you could bear and still find moments of joy, of connection, of purpose. The human heart is remarkably resilient, capable of containing grief and gratitude, betrayal and hope, all at the same time. I know this because I have lived it. I am living it still, every day. one moment at a time, making my way through a life that is not what I expected, but is mine nonetheless. And that, in the end, is all any of us can do. We take what life gives us, we make our choices, and we keep moving forward. Even when the person we trusted most turns out to be a stranger, even when death itself turns out to be a lie. We keep going, because the alternative is to stop, and stopping is the only thing I have ever refused to do. If you have made it this far, if this story has touched something in your heart or illuminated some corner of your own experience, then I want to thank you for listening. These stories matter because they remind us that we are not alone in our pain, that others have walked similar paths and found their way through. They matter because they teach us that betrayal is not the end, that grief is not permanent, that even the deepest wounds can eventually become scars we carry with strength rather than shame. I share them not because I have answers, but because I believe in the power of witness, in the importance of knowing that someone else understands. So thank you for being here, for giving me your time and your attention. May your own journey, whatever form it takes, lead you to a place of peace. And may you never have to discover that the person you loved most was someone you never really knew at all.